Denis Prager is a well-known political commentator, Orthodox Jew, and founder of PragerU. And despite being an avowed conservative, his perspective on softcore pornography and masturbation bears striking similarities to Hugh Hefner, who is credited with normalizing porn use in society and ushering in the sexual revolution. Now, I have a lot of respect for Prager and think he's done a tremendous amount of good in the world. But as someone who has struggled with porn addiction and helps others break out of it, I do take issue with his opinion on this topic. In this video, I'm going to review some quotes from Denis that are taken from his interview with Matt Fradd on Pints with Aquinas, compare them with quotes from Hugh Hefner, and discuss my own counter-arguments. But before we look at the quotes, I want to make it clear that Denis does not condone modern pornography, which is often violent and aggressive, but in his defense of porn and masturbation is referring to the Playboy magazine that was around in the 1960s when he was a teenager. In the interview, Denis begs the question, who is being hurt? You have to have a victim. And Hugh Hefner agrees, saying, I reject the idea that seeing a naked woman is harmful. The core assumption here is that there's nothing inherently harmful about looking at a woman. Putting aside the issue of whether or not the woman being portrayed is harmed, let's steelman their argument by saying the image is generated by AI. Modern brain science tells us that neurons that fire together wire together, which means that the more someone looks at porn, even if it's just a classic Playboy pinup, the more their brain will associate sexual arousal with those specific images. The harm that's being done to someone who looks at those nude images is that it distorts their sense of reality, of what real bodies look like. This makes it more difficult for them to enjoy intimate relationships with their partner, which undermines intimacy between loved ones, leading to marital breakdown. The real victims of porn use are the wives and husbands who feel betrayed and neglected by the person using porn, and their children who feel abandoned and depressed when their parents tell them they're splitting up. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. Prager says, I won't call a fantasy evil. There's too much real evil on the earth. And Hefner says, I believe in the democratic process and in the moral integrity of fantasy. Here the idea is that we've got bigger fish to fry than policing people's thoughts. If someone wants to fantasize about sexual encounters, what's wrong with that? It might actually help give them an outlet so that they don't act out and cheat or buy sex from somebody. But what this argument gets wrong is that fantasy is disconnected from our actions in daily life. But nothing could be further from the truth. Ralph Waldo Emerson famously said, sow a thought and you reap an action. Sow an act and you reap a habit. Sow a habit and you reap a character. Sow a character and you reap a destiny. If you sow a thought of fantasizing about a woman who is way out of your league, you'll reap a habit of masturbating to the idea that you can have sex with her. And if you sow a habit of masturbation, you'll reap a character that lacks self-control. And if you lack self-control, you're destined for a life of mediocrity. The pornographization of society has contributed to an entire generation of mediocre men who have done nothing to stop the advance of evil. So if Prager cares about combating evil, he should care about young men fantasizing, because that is the very thing that prevents them from becoming men of courage and honor capable of combating evil in the world. In the next quote, Prager says, what about a man who can't attract a woman? And Hefner agrees, saying, we don't all get dealt the same hand in life. Some men need fantasy and escape more than others. This sentiment goes to the heart of incel culture, an online world of men who are angry that they are involuntarily celibate. That is, they don't have any women who want to sleep with them. The underlying assumption that drives incel culture is that men have sexual needs that must be gratified. Prager and Hefner would like to think that looking at porn and masturbating is enough to provide solace to men who are lonely and have difficulty finding romantic partners. But in reality, it just drives them to despise the objects of their lust and desire, resenting them for rejecting them. The truth is that men don't need sex to be healthy and thrive. Many men throughout history have been single and done great things for society, channeling their energies towards good and helping those who are marginalized. What men really need is a challenge to a higher calling and not just an excuse to give in to their base desires, which will only make them hate themselves and the world who mocks them for their failure to take responsibility for their lives. Prager concludes his debate on porn and masturbation with Matt Fradd by saying, ideally, I agree with you. That is, Prager agrees in a perfect world, a man should not masturbate or look at softcore porn. Hefner has a similar view, saying, I believe in ideals, but not at the expense of the truth. Fantasy and desire are a part of who we are. In the end, Prager admits that it's not ideal for a man to look at a porn and masturbate. He just doesn't think that it's morally evil, or something we should be devoting a lot of time to considering how many other more important causes are out there. This is the pragmatic argument. Sure, it would be great if no men watched porn and masturbated, but let's be realistic here. No matter what we do or say, men will want to do it, have been doing it for centuries, and it's really not that big of a deal. Now, I don't agree that looking at porn and masturbating is morally neutral, but for sake of argument, let's say that I did. Even if those acts are not in and of themselves morally evil, the attitude that we should turn a blind eye to a behavior that produces mediocre results in human beings is a terrible standard to have. Sure, it's not morally evil to be a C student, but should we encourage high school students to put in the bare minimum because we know that studying is hard and many of them don't care anyways? It might not be morally evil to smoke marijuana, but should you turn a blind eye to your nephew who is a stoner, even when you see it's holding him back from his full potential? It is a deep form of love to hold someone to a higher standard, and it's actually a form of hate to hold an indifferent attitude towards their less than ideal behavior, even if it's not inherently morally evil. That's why I love old shows like Coach Carter and Stand and Deliver. In both of these movies, passionate young educators come into schools that are racked by poverty, violence, and underachievement, and they raise the bar higher than even the other schools who are doing much better could. Ironically, the response from the community of parents is anger and protest. Really? Trying to teach kids from the project's calculus? They can barely do elementary school math. You're crazy. Wow, you're actually not going to let my kid play basketball because he's not sitting at the front of the class? There's no chance he'll make it to college anyway. Just let him enjoy his time in the sun. What these pragmatic parents don't understand is that someone who is struggling in mediocrity doesn't need to be coddled and told that what they're doing is okay. What they need is a helping hand and someone who cares about them by believing that they can do better.